My name is Sheriff Roy Brennan, and I have served as the Sheriff of Collier County, Florida for 23 years. Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. If you're watching this from Florida, especially if you've spent time in the 10,000 Islands or the deeper parts of the Everglades, pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment. Have you ever been out on the water after sunset and felt like the mangroves were watching you? Have you ever noticed that your boat's GPS suddenly showed you in a location that should be miles away? If you have, then you already know that there's something wrong with certain parts of the backcountry. What I'm about to tell you goes against every oath I swore when I pinned this badge on my chest. After what happened on March 15th, 2019, after we lost another search and rescue team in Sector 13, after I learned that this has been happening since at least 1947, I can no longer remain silent. There is a specific area in the Everglades, approximately 47 square miles, located between the Tamiami Trail and the northern edge of the 10,000 Islands, that does not behave according to the laws of physics as we understand them. The federal government knows about it. The Miccosukee and Seminole elders have known about it for centuries, and the Collier County Sheriff's Department has been quietly covering up disappearances in this zone for over 70 years. Everyone has the right to know what is really happening in the area we internally refer to as the drowning hours. This is the story that federal agencies, that my own department, would prefer stayed buried under alligator-infested water and decades of classified incident reports. Before March 15th, 2019, I was a rational man. In my 23 years as sheriff, I had dealt with every kind of crime and tragedy that Southwest Florida can produce. Drug trafficking through the backcountry, pythons eating pets, tourists getting themselves killed doing stupid things in the wilderness, bodies dumped in the swamps, hurricanes. I had seen plenty. I was trained as a Marine before my law enforcement career, spent time in Iraq during the first Gulf War, and I prided myself on being unshakable. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that supernatural nonsense. The Everglades was dangerous, sure, but it was dangerous in comprehensible ways. Heat stroke, dehydration, getting lost, alligators, venomous snakes. These were all things I could explain, things I could protect people from with proper training and equipment. I had personally rescued dozens of people from the backcountry, pulled bodies from the water, coordinated massive search operations. I thought I understood the wilderness I had sworn to protect. I was wrong. I was so goddamn wrong that even now, almost 6 years later, I sometimes wake up at 3:33 in the morning with the taste of salt water in my mouth and the sound of synchronized breathing in my ears, even though I'm alone in my bedroom 50 miles from the coast. The mark on my chest is always cold when I wake like this. Cold, like deep water. Cold in a way that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the fact that I am no longer entirely here. No longer entirely in the singular timeline, the singular reality. The call came in at 6:47 p.m. on March 15th, 2019. A fishing guide named Marcus Chen had radioed the Coast Guard to report that his clients, a family of 4 from Ohio, had disappeared. Not gone missing. Not fallen overboard. Disappeared. Marcus was a 20-year veteran guide, calm under pressure. The kind of man who'd worked the backcountry through hurricanes and had stories about wrestling hammerheads onto boats. He was not prone to panic. But when the Coast Guard patched the call through to our dispatch, his voice was wrong. Too flat. Like he was reading from a script he didn't quite understand. He kept saying the same thing over and over. They went into the water, and the water went into them. And now they're everywhere and nowhere, and I can taste them when I breathe. The Coast Guard sent coordinates. I looked at them and felt a cold understanding in my stomach before I even pulled up the map. The coordinates placed Marcus's boat in Sector 13. We don't call it that officially. On the public maps, on the charts available to civilians, it's just unmarked mangrove islands and shallow waters, like any other part of the 10,000 islands. But every sheriff in this county since 1947 has known about Sector 13. Every dispatcher is trained to note when calls come from that area. Every deputy is told, if you can avoid responding to an incident in Sector 13, avoid it. Wait. Document. Pass it up the chain. Above all, do not go in after dark. I had never been told why. I had asked my predecessor, Sheriff Tom Whitmore, about it once, shortly after taking office. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said, Roy, the rule exists for a reason. The Miccosukee call it the place where water forgets it was water. You follow the protocol. You keep people out when you can, and you do not, under any circumstances, go looking for missing persons after sunset. You file the report. You wait 3 days. Then you write it up as lost at sea or alligator attack, and you move on with your life. I thought he was talking about some kind of criminal operation, maybe drug runners who'd paid off previous sheriffs to keep the area clear. I thought maybe there was something illegal happening out there that the department was quietly allowing in exchange for keeping violence out of the populated areas. I was naive. Marcus Chen's boat was found drifting near Sandfly Key at 8:23 p.m., just as the sun was sinking into the Gulf and turning the water the color of infected wounds. The boat's engine was running. All of Marcus's equipment was present. His client's belongings were neatly arranged on the seats, fishing rods still set in their holders, a cooler with sandwiches still fresh, a child's pink backpack with a name tag that read, Sophie Henderson, age 9, Columbus, Ohio. But no people. Not Marcus. Not the Henderson family. Just an empty boat with the radio still on and a strange smell in the air that the responding Coast Guard crew described as wrong salt, like ocean water that died and rotted and then came back. They found Marcus's phone on the captain's seat. The screen was cracked, but the phone was still functional. When they tried to review the last photos and videos Marcus had taken, they found something that made the Coast Guard commander immediately call me instead of continuing the search. The timestamp on the most recent video was 6:03 p.m., 44 minutes before Marcus made his distress call. The video showed Marcus filming his clients, the Henderson family, father, mother, teenage daughter, 9-year-old Sophie. They were sitting on the boat, smiling, eating snacks, normal. Then the camera jerked and pointed at the water. You could hear Marcus's breathing, rapid and confused. The water around the boat was moving strangely. Not waves, not current. The water was rising up in columns, in impossible vertical streams, like someone had reversed gravity for liquid, but nothing else. The columns were everywhere, dozens of them, hundreds, all around the boat, creating a forest of standing water. And in the water, shapes, human shapes, not drowning, not swimming, standing in the columns of vertical water. suspended, their faces visible through the transparent liquid. Marcus was making a sound, not quite screaming, more like confused laughter. The video jerked again and showed one of the columns right next to the boat. Inside it, perfectly visible, was a woman in a dress from the 1950s. She was looking directly at the camera. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was moving, but no bubbles came out. She reached out her hand and placed it flat against the wall of water as if it were glass. The video ended. The Coast Guard commander, a man named Patrick Torres, who'd spent 30 years dealing with maritime disasters, told me in a voice that shook just slightly, "Sheriff, I've seen bodies in the water. I've pulled up corpses that had been down for weeks. I've seen things that would make normal people puke, but I've never, not once, seen water behave like that. And I've never seen someone in the water who was clearly not drowning, not dead, just existing in a way that water shouldn't allow." I told him I'd take over the investigation and to keep his crew out of Sector 13 until morning. He didn't argue. I called my chief deputy, a woman named Sarah Ortiz, who'd been with the department for 15 years, and told her to meet me at the dock with a boat and full search equipment. She started to respond, then stopped. "Sheriff, what are the coordinates?" I read them to her. Long silence. Then, "Roy, that's Sector 13. Protocol says we wait until morning. Protocol says we absolutely do not go out there after dark." I looked at my watch. It was 8:45 p.m., full dark in 15 minutes. I had a boat with 5 missing people and video evidence of something impossible. I said, "I'm the sheriff, Sarah. Protocol is what I say it is. Meet me at the dock." She did, but when she arrived, she brought something unexpected. She brought an old man, maybe 75, with traditional Miccosukee tattoos on his weathered arms and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Sheriff Brennan," Sarah said, "this is Johnny Osceola. He's a medicine man from the Miccosukee Reservation. He needs to talk to you before you go out there." I started to protest, but Johnny Osceola spoke first. His voice was like gravel and honey mixed together. "Your predecessor kept the protocol for a reason, Sheriff. The place you're going, my people call it Wekita Hachi, the place where water remembers. Your people have called it other things over the years. The drowning hours, Sector 13, the dead Gulf. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is that it is a threshold, a place where the boundary between what is and what was and what might be becomes thin like spider silk. Water is memory, Sheriff. Water keeps everything. And in that place, the water remembers so much that it cannot hold the memories inside itself anymore. So the memories come out. They stand up. They reach for the living. And sometimes, if the tide is right, if the moon is right, if a living person gets too close, the water takes them and adds them to what it remembers." I stared at this old man and felt anger rising. I didn't have time for mystical nonsense. I had 5 missing people. I said, "Mr. Osceola, I appreciate your cultural perspective, but I need to conduct a search and rescue operation, not listen to ghost stories." He didn't look offended. He looked sad. "My grandfather was a guide in these waters in the 1940s. He took white soldiers out to the islands, helped them fish, showed them the channels. In 1947, a military unit came through, 40 men, looking for something they wouldn't name. They had equipment, scientific instruments, suits that protected against radiation. They went into Wekita Hachi. 3 days later, 7 of them came back. Only 7. The other 33 were never found. Your department's first sheriff a man named Walter Keene. He wrote it up as a boating accident. Mass drowning. My grandfather knew better. He saw one of the survivors before the military took them away. The survivor was wet, not damp. Wet. Completely soaked. But he had been out of the water for 12 hours. He couldn't stop dripping. And when my grandfather looked at his eyes, he said the man's eyes looked like they were full of water, like he was seeing through a layer of liquid that no one else could perceive. That man drowned on dry land 3 days later. He drowned sitting in a hospital bed in a locked room. They found him with his lungs full of salt water that matched no ocean they could test, water that had a chemical composition that should not exist on Earth. Johnny Osceola pulled a small leather bag from his pocket. Take this. It contains herbs and shell pieces that my people have used for centuries to ward against the water's hunger. It may not save you, but it might give you a chance to leave what you find out there. Sarah looked at me, her expression unreadable. I took the bag, not because I believed, but because something in Johnny Osceola's voice, some fundamental certainty, made me want every advantage I could get, no matter how irrational. We launched the boat at 9:15 p.m., under a moon that was 3 days from full, and a sky scattered with stars that seemed too bright, too sharp, like they were closer than they should be. Sarah piloted the boat while I studied the GPS coordinates. We had night vision equipment, thermal imaging, radio communications with dispatch, every piece of modern technology we could bring. The water was calm, almost glassy, reflecting the stars so perfectly that it felt like we were flying through space rather than crossing the Gulf. The temperature was 78 degrees Fahrenheit, warm and humid as always. But as we got closer to Sector 13, as we crossed some invisible boundary that I felt rather than saw, the temperature began to drop. Not outside, inside me. Like cold was seeping up from my bones. Sarah felt it too. I saw her shiver, even though the night air hadn't changed. The GPS started acting strangely. The coordinates would flicker, showing us in one location, then another, then back, jumping miles in an instant. "Sheriff," Sarah said, her voice tight, "our position keeps changing. According to this, we're simultaneously approaching the coordinates and we're already 15 miles past them. That's not possible." I checked my own GPS unit. Same thing. Schrodinger's boat. We were in two places at once, or we were nowhere, or the concept of place had stopped meaning what it should. The radio crackled. Dispatch trying to reach us. But the voice that came through wasn't our dispatcher. It was multiple voices speaking in unison. Men and women and children, all saying the same words at the same time. The water remembers. The water remembers. The water remembers. Turn back before the water remembers you. Sarah grabbed the radio and shut it off. Her hands were shaking. "That didn't just happen," she said. "That didn't just happen." But it did. We both heard it. At 9:47 p.m., we entered a field of vertical water columns. Johnny Osceola had been right. The water was standing up, defying gravity, defying physics, creating a forest of liquid pillars that rose 30, 40 feet into the air. They were everywhere, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching as far as our spotlight could reach. Each column was perhaps 6 feet in diameter, perfectly cylindrical, the water inside swirling slowly like blood in a test tube. And inside each column, we saw them. People. Not swimming. Not drowning. Not dead. Existing. A man in a World War II naval uniform, his eyes open. his mouth forming words we couldn't hear. A woman in a dress from the 1890s, her hair floating around her face, her hands pressed against the column's surface as if against glass. Children. Dozens of children, from different eras, different decades, all suspended in water that held them like amber holds insects. Some were recent, wearing modern clothes, their faces still recognizable. Others were older, their clothing rotted, their skin gray, but their eyes still aware, still seeing. Sarah was making a sound in her throat, a sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite screaming. I forced myself to scan each column with the spotlight, looking for Marcus Chen, looking for the Henderson family, and I found them. In a column approximately 50 feet from our boat, all 5 of them, Marcus and the Hendersons, together, standing in the water. Their eyes were open. They were looking at us. And then, in perfect synchronization, they raised their hands and pointed past us, toward the center of the column field, toward something we couldn't yet see. I should have turned the boat around. Protocol said to document and leave. Common sense, survival instinct, every rational thought in my head was screaming to get out of there. But I couldn't, because Marcus Chen's lips were moving. And even though there was no way we should be able to hear him through the water and the distance, we heard him. Not with our ears, with something else. Some way of perceiving that didn't involve sound waves or air vibration. His voice came from inside our skulls, from behind our eyes, from the taste at the back of our tongues. Sheriff Brennan, the voice that was Marcus, but also wasn't. Marcus said, "You need to see. You need to understand. The water remembers everything. Every person who died in these waters, every ship that sank, every plane that crashed, every body ever committed to the Gulf. The water keeps them. Time isn't a line out here, Sheriff. Time is a puddle. Everything that ever happened is happening now. We're all here. All of us. The soldiers from 1947. The Spanish explorers from the 1500s. The indigenous people from before written history. Everyone who the water claimed. We exist in all moments simultaneously. We are the memory of water made manifest. And the boundary is breaking, Sheriff. More and more people are falling through. The columns are appearing closer to shore, in waters where civilians boat every day. Soon, it won't be just Sector 13. Soon it will be all the waters, and everyone will see what we see. Everyone will become what we are. Sophie Henderson, the 9-year-old girl from Ohio, her pink backpack still somehow on her shoulders in the water, turned her head and looked directly at me. Her voice joined Marcus's voice, speaking with the same tone, the same rhythm. We need a guardian, Sheriff. We need someone to maintain the boundary, someone to keep the living from crossing into the memory and the memory from spilling into the living world. Someone to stand at the threshold. The last guardian died in 2015. There has been no one to hold the line. That's why the columns are rising. That's why we're appearing. Someone must choose. Someone must become the bridge. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin hard enough to hurt. Roy, we need to leave. Now. Whatever this is, whatever they are, we can't help them. We can't save them. We need to go. She was right, but I couldn't move, because I was seeing something else now, something rising from between the columns of standing water. A massive column, wider than the others, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, rising higher than the rest, 50 feet, 60 feet, towering over the forest of trapped memories. And at the center of this column, I saw what looked like a door. Not a door made of wood, or metal. A door made of absence, of void, a rectangular shape of pure darkness that somehow had depth, that led somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't Florida, wasn't Earth, wasn't part of any reality I had ever known existed. The door was opening. I could see things on the other side, landscapes of water that flowed upward, skies that were underneath oceans, structures built from liquid and light that defied description. And in that other place, I saw people, not trapped in columns, moving freely, living, existing in a state that was beyond life and death, beyond present and past. They saw us. They saw me. And I understood, with a clarity that hurt my mind, that this was what Johnny Osceola's grandfather had described. This was what the military in 1947 had found. This was the truth that had been classified under the Atomic Energy Act, not because it involved nuclear weapons, but because it involved something far more destabilizing to human understanding of reality. There were other dimensions, other states of being, and in places where water and time and geography intersected in specific ways, the barrier between these dimensions became permeable. Sector 13 wasn't just a dangerous patch of water. It was a wound in reality, and something needed to hold that wound closed. A new voice spoke. This one came from the massive central column, from near the door of absence. The voice was old, older than old. It sounded like continents moving, like ice ages advancing and retreating, like the first rain that ever fell on Earth. Sheriff Roy Brennan, you have come to the threshold. You have seen what remains hidden from most. Now you must choose. Continue your life. Return to shore. File your report. Accept the lies and the protocol and the cover-up. Let the boundary continue to weaken. Let more people fall through. Let the water's memory continue to rise until it spills over into all the waters of the world. Or step forward, touch the water, accept the mark, become the guardian. You will not die, you will not drown, but you will change. You will exist in multiple states. You will see all timelines simultaneously. You will feel every death that occurs in these waters. You will hold the boundary with your will and your awareness. You will be forever cold with deep water cold. You will never again sleep peacefully. You will never again be fully human. But you will protect. You will keep the threshold from expanding. You will honor the old agreements that your government has forgotten. You will do what the indigenous peoples did for millennia before white men came with their science and their disbelief. You will be the bridge between worlds. I stood at the bow of the boat. Sarah was still holding my arm, pleading with me to leave. The leather bag Johnny Osceola had given me was heavy in my pocket. I thought about my wife, my 2 daughters, both grown now, with families of their own, my grandchildren. I thought about Sophie Henderson's parents, about how they came to Florida for a vacation and ended up suspended in a column of water, trapped in a state that wasn't quite death, but wasn't life. I thought about every person who disappeared in these waters over the last 70 years. 33 soldiers in 1947, fishing guides, tourists, locals who knew better, but went out anyway. All of them existing now in this liminal space, this puddle of collapsed time, where every moment was simultaneous and eternal. I told Sarah to take the boat back to shore. She refused. I told her that was an order. She said, "I've been your deputy for 15 years, Roy. I know when you're about to do something stupid. I'm not leaving you." I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. I said, "Sarah, if I do this, If I choose what they're asking me to choose, you need to be the one who understands what happened. You need to be the one who knows the truth. You need to tell Johnny Osceola that I listened. You need to make sure the protocol stays in place until a replacement can be found, until my term is up, until someone else is ready to take this burden. Her face went white. Roy, no. You don't even know what they're offering. You don't know what you'll become. I smiled at her. It felt wrong on my face, like the expression was being puppeted by something else. I know enough. I know that if I don't do this, that door keeps opening. Those columns keep rising. More people end up like Marcus and the Hendersons. More families lose fathers and mothers and children to something that can't be explained, can't be fought, can't be comprehended. At least this way, there's a reason. At least this way, someone is standing guard. I stepped onto the gunwale of the boat. The nearest column of vertical water was 6 feet away. Inside it, a teenage boy in 1980s clothes watched me with eyes that were ancient beyond his years. I could hear Sarah screaming at me to stop. I could hear dispatch trying to raise us on the radio. A dozen voices talking at once, past and present collapsing together. I could feel the weight of every eye in every column. Hundreds of people who were and weren't, all of them waiting to see if I would jump, if I would choose, if I would become what they needed me to become. I thought about Sheriff Walter Keene in 1947, how he must have known the truth and chosen to hide it. I thought about all the sheriffs after him who maintained the protocol without understanding why. I thought about Sheriff Tom Whitmore's warning, about the Miccosukee name for this place, about Johnny Osceola's grandfather seeing soldiers drown on dry land, and I jumped. The water was not cold. The water was not warm. The water was every temperature that water has ever been, simultaneously freezing and boiling, comfortable and agonizing. I couldn't breathe, but I didn't need to breathe. I couldn't see, but I could see everything. I was drowning, and I was floating, and I was standing, and I was flying. Time was not a line. Time was not a line. Time was not a line. It was a sphere, a web, a puddle, a spiral, a shape that had no name in human geometry. I saw the soldier from 1947, the moment he first entered the water, the moment he realized he wasn't going to surface, the moment he understood that he was becoming something else. I saw Spanish conquistadors shipwrecked in 1521, calling out to a god who couldn't hear them as the water held them in its memory. I saw indigenous peoples from 1,000 years ago conducting rituals at the edge of this place, singing songs in languages that no longer exist, maintaining the boundary with ceremony and sacrifice. I saw the Henderson family in their hotel room that morning, excited for their fishing trip, unaware that by nightfall they would no longer exist in a singular state. I saw Sarah in the boat, screaming my name, reaching for me, but I was already too far away, already in a place where distance meant nothing. I saw my own death, 15 years in the future, or 15 seconds ago, or right now, a death that wasn't an ending, but a transformation, a moment when I would finally stop holding the boundary and someone else would have to choose. I saw everything, everyone, all the possible timelines branching and collapsing and branching again. And through it all, I felt the mark forming on my chest, cold seeping into my sternum, spreading like frost across my ribs, permanent and irreversible. A handprint. No, not a handprint. A water print. The shape of every hand that ever drowned in the Gulf. All of them overlapping on my skin. All of them marking me as the guardian, the bridge, the one who stood at the threshold and said no further. The boundary holds here. When I surfaced, when I pulled myself back into the boat, gasping but not for air, shaking but not from cold, Sarah was staring at me with horror and understanding mixed together. My uniform was soaked. No, not soaked. Wet in a way that wasn't quite physical. I looked down at my chest and could see the mark through my shirt, a dark spreading stain that pulsed with something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite darkness. Sarah reached out to touch it, then pulled her hand back, as if burned. "Roy," she whispered, your eyes are full of water." I didn't need a mirror. I could feel it. I could see through layers now. See Sarah not just as she was at that moment, but as she had been as a child, as she would be as an old woman, as she might have been if different choices had been made. I could see the boat existing simultaneously in the present and as scrap metal in a junkyard 30 years from now, and as raw materials in a factory before it was built. Everything was happening at once. Linear time was an illusion maintained by limited human perception. I had stepped outside that limitation. I had become something else. The ancient voice spoke again, not from the central column this time, but from inside me, from the mark on my chest, from the water that was now part of my cellular structure. You are the guardian now. You will maintain the boundary. You will feel when someone approaches the threshold. You will know when the columns begin to rise. You will enforce the protocol. You will keep the living from falling through and the memories from spilling out. This is your duty until you find a replacement or until you die. And death for you now means something different than it did before. You have our gratitude, Sheriff Brennan. You have the gratitude of everyone who remains in the water and everyone who will not join us because you have chosen to stand watch. Sarah started the boat and drove us back to shore without speaking. What could she say? What words existed for what we had just witnessed, for what I had become? When we reached the dock, it was 11:57 p.m. We had been gone for 2 hours and 42 minutes. Except according to the dock's clock, we had been gone for 6 minutes. According to Sarah's watch, we had been gone for 3 days. Time was not a line. The dock was crowded with people, Coast Guard, other deputies, emergency services. They swarmed us with questions, with relief, with confusion about where we'd been and why our radio had gone silent. I let Sarah handle them. I stood at the edge of the dock, dripping water that should have dried in the warm night air but didn't, staring out at the Gulf, at the darkness where Sector 13 waited. I could feel it now. I could feel the boundary like a physical presence, like a membrane stretched across miles of water, thin in some places, holding in others. And where it was weakest, I could sense the columns rising, the memories pushing through, the door of absence opening just a crack. Maintaining the boundary wasn't passive. It required will. It required consciousness. I had to think about it, focus on it, hold it close through sheer mental effort. And I understood that this was what I would be doing for the rest of my life. However long that life lasted now, every moment, every day, even in sleep, some part of me would always be at the threshold, always holding the line, always preventing the water's memory from spilling over into the waking world. Johnny Osceola was waiting at the dock. He looked at me and nodded once, a gesture of recognition and respect and sorrow. He approached, moving through the crowd of officials and emergency workers as if he were invisible to them, as if only I could truly see him. When he stood in front of me, he placed his weathered hand on my chest, directly over the mark, and I felt warmth for the first time since entering the water, a brief flare of human heat in the endless cold. "Welcome to the long duty," he said softly. "My grandfather held it from 1947 until 1968, 21 years of standing guard. Your predecessor, Sheriff Whitmore, he held it from 1968 until he died in 2015. 47 years. You saw him out there, didn't you? In the columns. Still there. Still aware. Sheriffs of Collier County have been the guardians since white men came to these lands and broke the old agreements. Before that, my people held the duty. We had rituals, support, community knowledge. You will have none of that. You will hold it alone with your will and your sacrifice. I am sorry. I am grateful. I know both truths can exist together." He pulled something from his bag, a small carved shell on a leather cord. "Wear this. It is not protection, but it is recognition. When the burden becomes too heavy, when you can no longer maintain the boundary, it will heat against your skin. That is your warning. That is when you must find your replacement." He placed the cord around my neck. The shell settled next to the cold mark. Two opposing forces, ancient warmth and deep water cold, in balance on my chest. Johnny Osceola stepped back. "Go home, Sheriff. Be with your family while you can still pretend to be the man you were. But know that you will never sleep deeply again. Know that you will always be partially there at the threshold, holding the line. Know that the water remembers you now, and what the water remembers, it never forgets." Sarah drove me home. We didn't speak. What was there to say? When we pulled into my driveway, she finally broke the silence. "What do I tell everyone? What do I put in the report?" I looked at her, saw her in all her possible timelines, saw her as the next sheriff when I was gone, saw her making the same choice I had made or refusing it, and watching the boundary collapse. "You tell them that we found Marcus Chen's boat. You tell them that we conducted a search but found no survivors. You tell them that the Hendersons and Marcus Chen were lost at sea, presumed drowned, bodies not recovered. You follow the protocol. You mark Sector 13 as dangerous waters. You make sure dispatch flags any calls from that area. And you wait. When I can't hold it anymore, when the shell heats and warns me that my time is ending, I'll call you. And you'll decide if you want to know the whole truth or if you want to live in ignorance like everyone else." She looked at me with tears running down her face. "Roy, you're the closest thing I've had to a father since my dad died. I can't just watch you disappear into this. I can't." I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I had just become something that saw all timelines, all possibilities, and I knew the truth. It wouldn't be okay. It would never be okay again. "Take care of my family, Sarah. Tell them I'm working a case that's going to keep me busy. Tell them I'll be distant for a while. They'll understand eventually, or they won't. Either way, make sure they're protected." I got out of the truck. Sarah drove away. I stood in my driveway, dripping water that would never dry, staring at my house where my wife was sleeping, where normalcy and linear time and human ignorance still reigned. I couldn't go inside yet. Not like this. Not while I could still see her in every moment of her life simultaneously. While I could perceive the house as it was when we bought it 20 years ago, and as it would be when abandoned after my death. I needed to center myself. I needed to focus on the present. I needed to be Sheriff Roy Brennan, husband and father, not the guardian of an impossible threshold between realities. I went to my office instead, sat at my desk, pulled up the classified files that every sheriff inherits. The files marked Sector 13, authorized personnel only. I had looked at these files before, but never understood them, never believed what they documented. Now I read them with new eyes, eyes that could see the truth beneath the bureaucratic language. Report from Sheriff Walter Keene, March 1947. 33 military personnel lost in waters near 10,000 islands. 7 survivors recovered exhibiting signs of psychological trauma and physical anomalies. Federal authorities have classified the incident under Atomic Energy Act. Local investigation suspended by order of Department of Defense. Recommend establishing permanent protocol to restrict civilian access to coordinates provided. Report from Sheriff James McKenzie, August 1952. Fishing vessel Maria Elena disappeared in Sector 13. 3 crew members, 2 tourists. Search conducted per protocol. No bodies recovered. Witnesses reported seeing unusual water formations in hours before disappearance. Federal liaison advised to document, but not investigate. Protocol maintained. Report after report. Decade after decade. Missing persons. Boats found empty. Witnesses who saw things that couldn't be explained. Coast Guard crews who refused to return to certain coordinates. Civilians who came back changed, who drowned on dry land, who woke up screaming about being everywhere and nowhere. And between the lines of these reports, I could see the truth that had been systematically hidden. My predecessors had known. Some of them had been guardians like me. Others had simply maintained the protocol without understanding why. Following orders passed down through generations of sheriffs, keeping the secret because that's what the office required. I found a locked drawer in my desk that I had never bothered to open before, a drawer whose key my predecessor had given me with the instruction, "Only open this when you understand." I understood now. I opened it. Inside was a green leather journal, old and water-stained, but still intact. On the first page, written in shaky handwriting, Journal of Sheriff Walter Keene. May God forgive me for what I've done. May the water remember me kindly when my time comes. I read through the night, through the hours when normal humans sleep, but guardians remain aware, always feeling the boundary like a second heartbeat. Sheriff Keene had been there in 1947 when the military unit went into Sector 13. He had been part of the initial response. He described in detail what I had just experienced: the columns of standing water, the door of absence, the people trapped in the water's memory. He had been the first guardian after the indigenous peoples stopped maintaining the boundary, after white settlement disrupted the old ceremonies and broke the agreements that had kept the threshold stable for millennia. He wrote about the cost. I cannot sleep for more than 30 minutes at a time. Even in those brief moments of unconsciousness, I am still there, at the water, holding the line. My wife thinks I am having an affair or have developed insomnia. She does not understand why I flinch when it rains, why I cannot take baths anymore, why I refuse to swim. How can I explain that water is no longer just water to me? That I feel every drop as a potential gateway, a possible breach? The mark on my chest spreads slowly. Each year it grows. It began as a handprint. Now it covers half my torso. The cold never leaves. I wear 3 layers in the Florida heat, and still I shiver. But the boundary holds. The columns do not rise beyond Sector 13. The door remains mostly closed. That is what matters. That is all that matters. Sheriff Keene had held the boundary for 21 years. I turned pages, reading his slow descent into whatever he became, watching his handwriting change from neat script to something more chaotic, more layered, as if multiple versions of him were writing simultaneously. His final entry was dated 1968. I can feel my replacement approaching. A young deputy named Tom Whitmore. He has the right temperament, the right isolation. The water has noticed him. Soon he will have to choose, as I chose. I am tired, so tired, but I cannot rest. Not yet. Not until the duty passes. The shell is heating against my skin. My warning. My time is ending. Tell Tom I'm sorry. Tell him the burden is great, but the purpose is greater. Tell him the water remembers everyone who serves. We do not disappear. We transform. We become part of the infrastructure of reality, part of the boundary itself. That is the ultimate sacrifice. That is the final gift. The next entry was in different handwriting. Sheriff Tom Whitmore. Walter Keene died today. Heart attack, the doctor said. But I was there. I saw him in his final moments. He was soaking wet. Water was running from his mouth, his nose, his eyes. Water that smelled wrong, that tasted wrong when I touched it. He looked at me and said, "It's yours now, Tom. The duty, the threshold. The water will call you. When it does, you'll understand why this had to be secret. You'll understand why we lie." 3 days later, I received the call. Boaters missing in Sector 13. I went. I saw. I chose. God help me. I chose. I read through Whitmore's entries. 47 years of service. 47 years of holding the boundary, maintaining the protocol, living with the mark and the cold and the constant awareness of the threshold. His handwriting also changed over time, becoming more fluid, more wave-like, as if his humanity was slowly dissolving into something more elemental. His final entry was dated 2015, just months before his death. The shell is hot. My time is ending. I have held the boundary for 47 years. I am ready to let go. But there is no replacement ready. No one in the department has the right qualities. The water is patient. The water will wait. But not forever. The next sheriff who takes office, Brennan, he is young, rational, a former Marine. He won't believe. Not at first. But he will learn. They always learn. I hope he chooses as I chose. I hope he has the strength to bear what must be borne. The columns are rising more frequently. The door is opening wider. Something has changed in the world. Some shift in the boundary between dimensions. The old agreements are failing. We need guardians now more than ever. Tell Brennan I'm sorry. Tell him it's an honor. Tell him the water remembers everyone who serves. Whitmore died in 2015, 4 years before I made my choice. 4 years when there was no guardian, when the boundary weakened, when the columns began appearing closer to shore. That's why the Henderson family was taken. That's why Marcus Chen was lost. Because there had been no one holding the line. No one preventing the water's memory from spilling over. I closed the journal and sat in the darkness of my office, feeling the mark on my chest pulse with cold, feeling the boundary stretching across 47 square miles of water, feeling every weak point, every place where the columns threatened to rise, every moment when someone in a boat got too close to the threshold and had to be gently pushed away through sheer force of will. This was my life now. This was my duty. I was Sheriff Roy Brennan, guardian of Sector 13, bridge between the world of linear time and the place where water remembers everything. I would hold this duty for years, decades maybe, until the shell heated and warned me that my time was ending, until I had to find my own replacement, until I joined Sheriff Keene and Sheriff Whitmore and all the others in the water's memory. I went home as the sun rose. My wife was awake, making coffee, moving through her morning routine. She looked at me, concern on her face. "Roy, you're soaking wet. Were you in the rain?" There had been no rain, but I was wet. Would always be wet now. Dripping water that came from nowhere and went nowhere. Water that was the mark of my transformation. I told her I had responded to a boating accident, that I fell in the water during a rescue, that I was fine. She believed me because people believe what makes sense, what fits into their understanding of reality. She couldn't see what I had become. Only those who had been to the threshold could see the truth. The months that followed were difficult. Learning to maintain the boundary while also performing my duties as sheriff was like learning to breathe manually, to think about a process that should be automatic. I had to consciously hold the line while also investigating crimes, attending meetings, managing personnel. I became distant. My family noticed. My wife asked if I was having health problems, if I needed to see a doctor. My daughters called less frequently, uncomfortable with the change they sensed but couldn't name. Sarah covered for me when I zoned out during conversations, when I flinched at the sound of running water, when I showed up to work soaking wet for no apparent reason. She was the only one who knew, the only one who could know. The protocol demanded secrecy. The guardianship required isolation. In my first year as guardian, I prevented 17 incidents. 17 times when boats entered Sector 13 without authorization, when civilians got too close to the boundary, when the columns began to rise in response to human presence. Each time, I had to focus, had to push back against the water's hunger, had to maintain the threshold through force of will. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. It was metaphysical exhaustion, the weariness of holding reality together with consciousness alone. I learned to sense when danger was approaching. The mark on my chest would grow colder, would pulse with a rhythm that matched the tides, would pull my attention toward the threshold regardless of what I was doing. I could be at my desk, at home, at a crime scene, anywhere. And suddenly, I would feel the boundary straining, and I would have to stop everything and focus on holding it closed. The technology failures became predictable. Any modern device that got too close to Sector 13 would malfunction. GPS units showing impossible coordinates. Radios producing voices from wrong decades. Cell phones receiving calls from people who had drowned years ago. Compasses spinning without finding north. Clocks showing multiple times simultaneously. I documented everything in my own journal, continuing the tradition started by Sheriff Keene. Future guardians would need to know what to expect, how to maintain the boundary, how to live with the mark and the cold and the constant awareness. I wrote about the physical changes. The mark spread slowly, just as it had for Keene and Whitmore. After 1 year, it covered my entire chest. After 2 years, it had spread to my shoulders and upper arms. The cold increased proportionally. I wore layers even in Florida summers. People assumed I was sick, that I had a thyroid condition or circulation problems. I let them assume. The alternative was explaining the truth, and the truth would have me committed to a psychiatric facility. I wrote about the perceptual changes, seeing in layers, perceiving time as simultaneous rather than linear, watching people and places exist in multiple states at once. This was the hardest part to adapt to. Human consciousness is built for linear time, for cause and effect, for a singular present moment. My consciousness had been forced to expand, to accommodate multiple timelines, to perceive reality as it actually exists beneath the illusion of sequential time. It was like learning to see in a new spectrum, like gaining a sense that no human was meant to have. Sometimes I would lose myself in the layers, would forget which timeline was the present, would respond to events that hadn't happened yet or had already passed. Sarah had to ground me, had to remind me when and where I was, had to keep me anchored to the singular present that everyone else inhabited. I wrote about the dreams. Guardians don't sleep the way normal humans sleep. We enter a state that is partially consciousness, partially dreaming, and always aware of the boundary. In this state, I would find myself at the threshold every night, standing among the columns, speaking with those held in the water's memory. They were not hostile. They were not monsters. They were people who had fallen through the boundary, who had been transformed by the water's hunger, who now existed in a state beyond conventional life and death. They had gained something in the transformation. They could perceive all of time simultaneously. They could see the threads of causality that connected events across decades. They understood the structure of reality in ways that no living human could comprehend. But they had lost something too. They had lost the ability to exist in a single moment. They had lost the mercy of linear time, the kindness of forgetting. They remembered everything, saw everything, experienced everything at once, and that totality of experience was its own kind of suffering. Marcus Chen was there often. So were the Hendersons. They told me they didn't blame me for not saving them. They said that saving wasn't possible, that they had crossed a point of no return the moment they entered Sector 13, when no guardian was present. They said they were learning to accept their new existence, that they were becoming something that might eventually transcend both life and death, to achieve a state that had no name in human language. They asked me to tell their families that they were not suffering, not exactly, that they had simply moved into a different mode of being, that they were learning to navigate existence without the anchor of linear time. In my 3rd year as guardian, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to be delivered to my wife after my death or disappearance. In the letter, I explained everything. The truth about Sector 13, the water's memory, the guardianship, my transformation, my duty. I told her that if I seemed distant, if I seemed cold, if I seemed to be somewhere else, even when I was sitting next to her, it was because I was holding back something vast and hungry, something that would consume thousands of people if I ever let go. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry. I told her that what I was doing mattered, even if she never understood why or how. I sealed the letter and gave it to Sarah with instructions to deliver it when the time came. She took the letter without speaking, but I saw tears in her eyes. She had watched me change over 3 years. She had seen me become something other than human. She knew that the letter would be needed sooner rather than later. The guardianship was not sustainable indefinitely. Keene lasted 21 years. Whitmore lasted 47. But they had lived in different times, when the boundary was stronger, when fewer people entered the waters, when the old agreements still had some power. The world was different now. More people, More boats. More technology that interfered with the threshold. More pressure on the boundary. I could feel it straining. I could feel the door of absence opening wider each year. I could feel the water's hunger growing. In my 4th year, something new happened. The columns began appearing outside of Sector 13. Not frequently, not many, but enough to know that the boundary was failing despite my efforts. A fishing boat reported seeing standing water columns near Marco Island, 30 miles from Sector 13. A kayaker in the 10,000 Islands saw a woman suspended in a vertical stream of water, her eyes open, her mouth forming words. The Coast Guard received reports of voices coming from the radio at coordinates that should have been normal waters. Each incident meant I had failed to hold the line completely. Each incident meant the water's memory was seeping beyond the threshold, spilling into areas where civilians were present, where the truth could no longer be hidden. I intensified my efforts, focused harder, slept less, spent every moment I could spare sitting at the dock, staring at the water, consciously reinforcing the boundary through sheer will. But I was one man holding back something vast. The water remembered thousands of years of deaths. The water remembered every person who had ever drowned in the Gulf of Mexico. The water remembered Spanish explorers and indigenous peoples and modern tourists and military personnel and children who fell from boats. All of that memory was pressing against the boundary, trying to manifest, trying to rise up in columns that defied physics. One guardian could not hold back an ocean of accumulated memory indefinitely. Sarah came to me in the 5th year and said we needed to talk. We went out on a boat, far from any listening devices, far from anyone who might overhear. She said, "Roy, you're dying. Not in the normal way, but you're fading. I can see it. You're barely here anymore. You exist mostly at the threshold now. You're holding the boundary so tightly that you're becoming part of it. That's what happened to the others, isn't it? Keene and Whitmore and all the guardians before them. They didn't just die. They merged with the boundary. They became part of the infrastructure." I looked at her and saw her in all her timelines, saw the moment approaching when she would have to choose, when the shell would heat against my chest and I would call her, and she would decide whether to accept the duty or let the boundary collapse. "Yes," I said. "That's the ultimate sacrifice. Guardians don't retire. Guardians don't hand off the duty cleanly. We hold the boundary until we can't distinguish between ourselves and what we're holding. Then we become part of it permanently. We join everyone else in the water's memory, but instead of being trapped in columns, we become the force that keeps the columns from rising. We become the metaphysical infrastructure that maintains the separation between dimensions." Sarah looked ill. "How long do you have?" I touched the shell around my neck. It was warm. Not hot yet, but warm. My warning. My time was approaching faster than I expected. Maybe a year. Maybe less. The boundary is under more pressure than ever. I'm spending all my energy holding it. When I can't hold it anymore, when the shell heats completely, you'll have to choose. Or we find someone else. But there's no one else, Sarah. No one in the department has the right qualities. No one has the isolation, the strength, the willingness to sacrifice everything. It has to be you. She was silent for a long time, staring at the water, at the place where Sector 13 lay beneath the surface, invisible but always present. Finally, she said, "What if I refuse? What if I let it collapse?" I had thought about this. I had seen the timelines where she refused. The columns rise everywhere. The door of absence opens fully. The water's memory spills out into all the waters of Florida, then the Gulf, then the Atlantic, then every ocean on Earth. People start disappearing by the thousands. They don't die. They transform. They become trapped in water's memory, existing in all times simultaneously, unable to return to linear existence. Within a month, governments notice. Within 3 months, coastal areas are evacuated. Within a year, humanity's understanding of reality is shattered. The old indigenous peoples knew how to handle this. They had ceremonies, protocols, guardians who were supported by their communities. Modern society has none of that. We have one person holding the line through sheer will. If that person fails, if there's no replacement, the boundary collapses completely. Sarah put her head in her hands. This isn't fair. This isn't right. One person shouldn't have to carry this burden. One person shouldn't have to give up their entire life, their humanity, their existence, just to keep reality stable. I agreed with her, but fairness had nothing to do with it. The threshold existed. The water remembered. Someone had to hold the line. That was the simple, brutal truth. In the 6th year, I began preparing for the transition. I took Sarah to the threshold. We went at night, when the columns were most visible, when the door of absence was easiest to perceive. She saw everything: the standing water, the trapped people, Marcus Chen and the Hendersons, still there, still aware, still existing in their liminal state. The massive central column with the door leading to another dimension. The ancient voice speaking from the water, from the boundary itself. The offer, the choice, guardian or bystander, bridge or witness, sacrifice or ignorance. She didn't choose that night. She said she needed time. I told her time was something I didn't have much of anymore. The shell around my neck was hot now, burning against my skin, my warning that the end was approaching. The mark had spread across my entire upper body. The cold was total. I could no longer feel warmth even in direct sunlight. I was more at the threshold than in the physical world. Sarah asked if it hurt. I told her the truth. It didn't hurt in the way she meant, but it was agony nonetheless. The agony of holding something too large for human consciousness. The agony of perceiving all time simultaneously. The agony of feeling every death in the waters, every person who drowned, every boat that sank, every tragedy that fed the water's memory. I felt them all. I was them all. I had become so merged with the boundary that I could no longer tell where I ended and the threshold began. 6 months later, on a night when the moon was dark and the stars were cold and distant, the shell around my neck burst into flames. Not real flames, metaphysical flames. The warning was complete. My time was ending. I called Sarah. She came to the dock, where we had first launched into Sector 13 6 years ago. She looked at me, and I knew she could barely see me anymore. I was mostly transparent now, mostly existing in the other dimension, mostly part of the infrastructure. Sarah, I said, and my voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the water and the air and the space between molecules. It's time. Choose. She stood at the edge of the dock, staring out at the dark water where the boundary waited. She said, "If I refuse, how long before it collapses?" I could see the timelines. 3 days, maybe 4. Then the columns begin rising everywhere. Then the door opens fully. Then everything changes. She was crying. And if I accept, You become what I am. You hold the line. You sacrifice your humanity, your relationships, your existence as a singular being. You become cold. You become aware. You become the guardian. And someday, decades from now, you'll stand where I'm standing and ask someone else to make the same choice. She looked at me, really looked at me, saw me in all my fractured, multidimensional existence. Roy, are you still in there? Is any of the man I knew still present? I didn't know how to answer that. I was Roy Brennan. I was also everyone who had ever drowned in the Gulf. I was the boundary itself. I was the mark and the cold and the awareness. I was everything and nothing. Enough, I finally said. Enough remains to tell you that the duty matters. Enough remains to be grateful that you're considering the choice. Enough remains to be sorry that it has to be this way. Sarah stepped onto the gunwale of the boat we had taken out, the same boat we had used 6 years ago, the same boat that had carried me to my transformation. She said, "Take care of them for me, my family, my friends. Tell them I died serving. Tell them it mattered." I would have told her that guardians don't die, that they transform, that she would continue in a different form. But she knew. She had read the journals. She had seen the columns. She understood what she was choosing. She jumped. The water rose to meet her. The columns formed around her. The door of absence opened, showing her the truth of existence, the structure of reality, the way time and dimension intersected in this one specific place. I felt the burden begin to lift from my consciousness. I felt the boundary accepting a new guardian. I felt Sarah transforming, felt the mark forming on her chest, felt the cold seeping into her bones, felt her awareness expanding to encompass multiple timelines and dimensions. And I felt myself finally letting go. The shell around my neck crumbled to ash. The mark on my chest stopped pulsing. The cold began to fade, replaced by something else, something that was neither warm nor cold, but simply was. I was dissolving, not dying, dissolving, becoming part of the water's memory, becoming part of the infrastructure that maintained the boundary, joining Sheriff Keene and Sheriff Whitmore, and all the other guardians who had made the same sacrifice, who had held the line until they merged with it completely. My final thought as Sheriff Roy Brennan, as an individual consciousness, was gratitude. Gratitude that Sarah had chosen. Gratitude that the boundary would hold. Gratitude that I had served. Then I stopped being Roy Brennan and became something else, something larger, something that existed in the water and the boundary and the space between dimensions. I became part of the infrastructure of reality. I became one of the guardians who no longer held the boundary from outside, but maintained it from within, woven into the fabric of the threshold itself. And from this new perspective, this omnipresent awareness, I could see everything. I could see Sarah surfacing, gasping, transformed, becoming the new guardian. I could see her return to shore and begin her duty. I could see her years stretching ahead, decades of service, until she too would have to find a replacement. I could see the cycles continuing, guardian after guardian, each one sacrificing themselves to hold back the water's memory, to keep the dimensions separate, to maintain the protocols that protected humanity from a truth it wasn't ready to comprehend. I could see into the past, see the indigenous peoples who had first discovered this place, who had first encountered the boundary, who had first established the ceremonies and protocols that kept it stable. I could see the Spanish explorers who had stumbled into Sector 13 and never returned. I could see the military unit from 1947, see them entering with their equipment and their scientific arrogance, see them falling through the boundary, see the 7 survivors who never truly survived, who drowned on dry land because they had been too changed by what they experienced. I could see all the missing persons, all the boats that vanished, all the families who lost loved ones and never got answers. And I understood that this was mercy. The truth would destroy them. The truth that their loved ones weren't dead but transformed, weren't gone but existing in a state that had no name, wasn't suffering but wasn't not suffering either. The protocol of lies and cover-ups was a kindness, a protection, a way of preserving the illusion of linear time and singular existence that makes human life bearable. I am Sheriff Roy Brennan. I am also not Sheriff Roy Brennan anymore. I am part of the water now, part of the memory, part of the boundary between dimensions. I exist in all times, simultaneously. I can see you reading this. I can see you questioning whether any of this is real. I can see you looking at maps of Florida, at the 10,000 islands, at the Everglades, wondering if there really is a place where water remembers everything, where columns of standing water hold people in suspended animation, where the laws of physics break down and time becomes negotiable. I can tell you that it's real. All of it. Sector 13 exists. The boundary exists. The guardians exist. Right now, as you read this, Sarah Ortiz is serving as Sheriff of Collier County, holding the line, maintaining the protocol, keeping the truth hidden. She is cold. She is aware. She is sacrificing everything to protect you from knowing what lies beneath the surface of those calm Gulf waters. Someday, maybe soon, maybe decades from now, she will find her replacement. The duty will pass. The cycle will continue. And somewhere in the water's memory, I will still be there, part of the infrastructure, holding the boundary from within, grateful for my service, accepting of my transformation, at peace with what I have become. If you're planning to visit Southwest Florida, if you're thinking about taking a boat into the backcountry, if you're adventurous and curious and drawn to remote waters, please listen to this warning. Stay away from the coordinates between the Tamiami Trail and the northern edge of the 10,000 islands. Do not enter areas marked as restricted on local charts. If your GPS starts showing impossible locations, turn around immediately. If you see water standing up in columns, defying gravity, reflecting wrong angles, do not approach. If you hear voices in the radio that sound like multiple people speaking in unison, shut off your equipment and leave. If you feel a sudden cold that has nothing to do with temperature, if you sense that time is behaving strangely, if you perceive layers of reality that shouldn't be visible, you are approaching the threshold. Turn back. The boundary exists for a reason. The protocol exists for a reason. The guardians sacrifice everything for a reason. Reality is more fragile than you know. Time is not a line, but a web. Water remembers everything. And in certain places, when conditions are right, when the boundary grows thin, the memory rises up and reaches for the living. Stay away from Sector 13. Stay away from the drowning hours. Welcome to Collier County. I'm still here, in the water, holding the line. Time isn't a line. The water remembers. Some boundaries exist for a reason. I was Sheriff Roy Brennan. Now I'm something else. Now I'm the cold in the deep water. Now I'm the memory that never forgets. Now I'm the guardian between worlds. And I'm still here, watching, waiting, holding the line forever.